Welcome back to The Way of the Wandering Wizard. I am, as always, Robert Andrew Meredith Kennedy. I am a pure and open channel for the finest vibrations of divine love and light, made manifest here, in service to Gaia and those who travel with her. Though most folks call me Bob the Wizard, some Gandalf Bob the Wise, others the weirdo in the kilt, and a lot more besides. My last little videoette, I made mention that at some point I'd have to talk about lockdown. Talk about the elephant in the world, the elephant in the room. That the events of 2020 have affected all of us in ways that we are only just starting to work out should be becoming clear to most folks. Quite literally, an event like that is world-changing. Now, while there have been many events that have been affected people all across the world, the commonality of experience in lockdown, as I sit here now, 2 years later, looking back, seems to be, to me, in this reflective mood on a full moon, to be the purpose, what it was. Literally a unifying event worldwide now. It brought up joys, it brought up fears for all of us. We've watched it all play out. What we personally get from lockdown is what we will get when we look back on it. The effects that great pandemic and what flowed afterwards have had on our society is the journey we are yet or going to be experiencing throughout the rest of this decade and beyond. That in some way, I don't know, a light, an energy, a consciousness, that opportunity to have a pause and have a really good, hard look at life was one that was taken by many, myself included. So while I can't comment on what lockdown was for you and how it's affected you, and to do so would be wrong. All I can comment on is how lockdown was for me and how it affected me and how I've seen it affect others. That does not in any way degrade, denude, denied anybody's personal experience. That it was an intense time for all of us, goes without saying. But anyway, my little personal trip through the joys of 2020. As I mentioned in my last little videoettes, I finished 2019 on a bit of a roll, really. We'd been with Cheeky, up to the Royal College of Psychiatry. It looked as if medicinal cannabis was finally starting to be recognised, decriminalised. And the hopes for the future were huge. Really was an exciting time. Now, Lou was tired. It was the end of a long season. She had a lot on her plate. But we finished 2019, or I finished 2019, stand away with my family. Off down to the farm at Cornwall. Usual family gathering. As always, a couple of trees had fallen down. They're quite big. They were huge. It's my job, or one of my day jobs. Skill sets, whatever you want to call them. So, of course, loaded the saw up, helped the father-in-law out. Why wouldn't I? It's my dad. Second dad. They were big trees and I didn't want anybody in the family to get injured. And I quite enjoy that solitary work of just sectioning a tree down. Taking something that's fallen naturally and process it ready to keep the farm warm for generations to come. Just the way I was enjoying it. Well, the first day it was big trees. I worked hard. Second day I was not feeling too bright. By the time I'd finished basically clearing the track and ringing everything up, I felt really ill, shaky. I just put it down to my standard thing of trying to prove to myself that I was fitter than I was post-accident. I pushed myself too hard. It wouldn't be the first time, probably won't be the last. Did the usual, arrived back in the wonderful farmhouse to have a bath and just crawled into bed, didn't even eat. I woke up, 2 o'clock in the morning, running sweat. Literally, it was pouring out of me. I was hot, I felt weird, and that was how I was for a couple of days. I mean, clearly, as a master, I'd self-diagnosed that I had actual man flu. I mean, really full-on man flu. It was flu, as far as I was concerned. A few days later, I rallied just about enough. Drove the family back home. I'll be honest, New Year, I don't even remember it that year. I think I just crawled into bed. I was exhausted. It took a few weeks to get over that one, which is why I put it down to being flu. Now, not pointing any fingers, but I do lots of varied work with lots of people like we all do. Diseases move about. We understand that now more than anything. If nothing else, looking back at those events will help us move forward as a species. This one was relatively benign for the masses, horrendous for the minority. But it does give us a way of looking at how we responded. Well, those were not the kind of thoughts that were flying through my head. I'll be honest, they were quite weird. I was just all out of sorts. I got back to work. Every time that I started doing physical work, I just got exhausted quicker. But, like everything, I have a robust immune system. I eat relatively well. Clearly I smoke. But other than that, I work in woods, I work in nature. I started to bounce back. Got back into the working pattern. Role playing, it would appear that many people had a similar Christmas. We were all laid low. It was all pretty crappy. Nobody really had much of a New Year's. Everybody felt quite rough. Lots of people were coughing and spluttering. And we didn't think much more of it. Now, clearly being ill and it rippling through the family, it's the usual dramas and tensions that can run in any household. She can possibly hear. I'll just shut the window. Oh, we do love a full moon in this house. Hang on to your hats, folks. Which probably brings me on to a poignant point. At some point in my life, I read, I understand, I do work with people. There was clearly going to come a point when we had children later in life, and they were all girls, and I live in a house full of girls. Say live, I hide in a cabin, they live in a house. It was inevitable that, let's just say, the natural ebb and flow of hormones, and having spent a weekend learning all about the menopause, I really, really wish I'd had that talk before lockdown. From the bottom of my heart. I mean, I was aware of it. I'm not going to make a huge thing of it, but it was certainly something. A massively contributing factor to mine and many others' personal journey. Over the next few months, probably the same as many of yours. I was forced into a space with my family in a very unusual circumstance while the whole world went quite literally into fear. Now, I was warned off by my family. I tend to be one of these, well, I've caught it, I'm over it, I'll be fine, and strut around the place. My brother works in hospital, and it was clear that the first wave there was something going on. Fit, healthy people falling, it was definitely something slightly different. And so we did the sensible thing. There's no point in resisting it, there was no point fighting it. I just basically went shopping once a week for my folks, as allowed. Alright, I may have got a bit carried away with some of the face masks, or the face covering. Unless folks think that I am being completely callous. You can't get a seal with a beard. Yeah, really. Partial at best. So I would cover my face with shemags, dressed as an Arab. On other occasions, I'd wear a Viking hat with a false beard over the top of my beard. Alright, mildly rebelling against a set of rules, while at the same time making a point about the beard. And strangely, I, at the time, championing a valid cause, which was, if you're having a laugh and you're relatively light in your life, it actually boosts your immune system. Who knew? There's always method to my madness. The trouble is, I've never really taken time to explain it. So, as I said, lockdown, as it progressed through, the same experiences as many others. As I will go on after we finish my life story, or this journey of my life, I will go on, I hope, and do a few teachings of Meredith, throwing a little light on a few ideas that are bouncing around my mind. I seem to be quite enjoying this process. It's helping me. Hope you enjoy watching it half as much as I do recording them. Now this is a full moon, so this is going to be a rambly one. Why not? If you're going to cover lockdown, seems to be the way to cover it. So as the ebb and flow, pressures, I'm not going to relive for all you guys. We know what we all went through. At times it was massively intense. Clearly, a house with a wizard with PTSD, trapped in a space away from his usual working practices, hemmed in, not able to go out into stone circles. That can build a bit of a pressure pot. I'm aware of how I discharge myself and my issues post-accident. By working, by being out in nature, by discharging any arguments or any buildings of pressure within the house, by understanding the same as we all do. And what did we all get? You're not getting out. So, at times, as the ebb and flow of the moon in particular ran, certainly in our house and possibly others, it could have a few days of quite intense emotions. This would of course bring up stuff and I'd be pottering. I've said it before, and this was probably my first example of where I really had to take on board some of my shit and take on board some of the stuff that I tell others. What you resist persists. You can't fight this. It's too big. Nobody knows what it's about. Just don't rebel. Don't kick off against it. Don't get all shouty about it. You're stuck. Do something practical with it. Make the best of the situation. So I did. I built a hedge out of bricks. Alright, it's been modified over the last year or so. But that was my lockdown project. I literally almost played like a child. Literally. Well, if I can't go out and visit stone circles and have ceremonies at certain times of the year, I'll build myself a fire pit and a henge in my garden. Coping strategy. Alright, I already had a cabin. Handy survival space for anyone. And probably the way that we as a family survived lockdown. Capacity just to have some separate spaces. Spaces that we could retreat into. So in many ways, it was a learning ground and a testing ground for me. Managing PTSD without those usual discharges, yes, of course it was difficult at times. At times I exploded, at times I burst into tears. The family work it through as best we could. They were rare, on reflection, according to the kids. But of course they would come up at times, and with them a great wash of memories, great, quite flashbacks, but events. And so this time round, because there was no work, no distraction, no running away from it, sit down, and I just ploughed through. Whatever was coming up, thoughts and feelings, just work it through. Use your mindfulness practice, all of the stuff that I teach, really, in an intense situation. And for the most part, it worked, I think. Well, nobody was dead. despite the occasional threat. Nobody got buried in the garden. Nobody got pushed downstairs. Nobody had their heads chopped off. Nobody got stabbed, knifed. Nothing got exploded. Felt like it at times, I'll be honest. It really did. But it was one of those moments that we all had. Now I give those, that's the intense of those peaks and troughs of life. The vast majority of my lockdown really was peaceful. Sitting out here, contemplating and writing my book. It was that final thing of going, okay, right, why is this happening? Okay. And I mean it, I felt slightly guilty for a little bit of thinking, shit, maybe the whole world had to stop until I wrote my book. Clearly not the case. Maybe the whole world needed to stop and reflect. That I will take. How it manifested for me was in writing a book. I read bits of it before I start these talks. The bit on lockdown is not repeatable. But it did show me my track through lockdown from fears, angers, outrages, and slowly I had a degree of understanding that when this all unfolds, it will give us a chance to really look at our world, look at the players in our world, look at what emerged from the world. Yeah? For nothing more, it's probably the greatest opportunity humanity's ever had to switch off the lights and switch them back up again and see where everything's moved to. Now, you don't need another voice saying, look at what just went on. There's always going to be winners and losers, by whichever way we measure. But the simple fact is, as far as I can see, is that that energy that flowed through us has shown us for who we are. Apparently it turns out I'm a dragon and a wizard. Who knew? It's a damn sight politer than what I think about an awful lot of some of the others. Starts with C, and it's the unutterable word that I will not do because it really upsets my mother. Right. A rambly full moon walk, I promised you. And so I'm going to indulge myself because it seems a good way to clear a lot of things. Now, strangely, as I look back, I pretty much accepted a lot of it. The lockdown, lock back out, lock in, lock out, and all of the changes and systems and process, I did find a challenge. But it certainly brought up a lot of things for all of us to look at. And we're all still looking at it now. Personally, it made me face an awful lot of stuff that I thought I dealt with. I really did. Because for the most part I had, but it was still there. Because I hadn't taken on board the body keeps the score. And I hadn't understood how ingrained my experiences on the road had become within me. Too busy trying to prove I was back to who I was beforehand, rather than accepting that I was changed. Strangely, probably changed for the better. Now that was my personal family journey. As I said, I've not mentioned the details, but at times it could get quite loud. That's that discharge without my usual working practice of either shouting at people in role playing or out in the woods or whichever other way I work it through. Because in many ways, that's what I have to accept. While there is a huge part of me that is very much at peace most of the time, I still have the other bit. It's the bit that looks after me. I now understand that. The greater effects on lockdown I experienced, the same as we all did. That sense of separation, of not being able to see your family, not being there for key events, not being able to gather for those great traditions that have run through all human life since life began here. Births, marriages, or partnerships, deaths, illness, times when many of us need our tribe around us. and yet we were all very separated. I personally struggled with that. Times that would make me quite angry, because while I absolutely understood the risk and the threat, it didn't balance it for me. But again, that was just how I experienced it personally. It felt a very out of balance. And as it ran on, to be honest, I started to see conspiracies left, right and centre. Having been lost down rabbit holes in the past, was that moment of going, no. What is running here is human nature. It's running on a big stage and we're all having it at the same time, which is what's always gone on, but with one unifying point in everybody's script. 2020, something changes. And what rolls out will be the adventure that we will all be undertaking. Now, clearly it brought up a lot for me. It's affected me in many ways personally. I found it a revisiting of my accident, not from the pain point of view, but yet again, trapped, not able to get out, not able to do the things that I wanted to do. Couldn't do it because I was physically incapable, and now I was ready and wanting to do these things. Get out there. Get cheeky moving. All of that uplifting energy that I was feeling stopped. And yet in many ways, as I said, as I came to peace with bits of it, probably like many others, we just literally looked at our world, and as it slowed down, quietened down, the speed of many of our lives went back down to something close to the natural world. A little bit up on it, rather than the intensity and the pressure of life in the modern world, which we all experience. No wonder we're all stressed. Well, all of us, clearly. As I've said at the start of this, what flows out of that 2020, whatever it was, that pause, that hiatus, that stop, take stock, look, clear and move forward, that we all went through, all going through, will be a great tale in its own telling. Now, it clearly affected me personally, as I said. I experienced all this. I was skirting around the subject. Now, from a personal, and to a degree, a little part of the cheeky story here, because this is the place to be talking about it. Clearly, Lucita had a bit of a nosedive, took a turn for the worst. Having got to a position where she understood her support network and her work, in many ways, as many people in palliative situations, is what keeps people driven, keeps people alive, keeps people drawing energy and trying to live the best within our limitations. For the hard lockdown at the start, I was not able to get out, nor would I have risked, until we knew what was going on. As soon as we were allowed to visit, I went down to visit, and she was a very changed woman. There was that knowing look in the eye. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the situation, because I said, probably more a personal thing, and I've already grieved a lot, as I will mention in the next episode, publicly at times. Some of the stuff I'd carried, suppressed. Over the course of that year, Lou steadily declined until she passed in December. Over the course of that time, both her and myself got our medical cannabis prescriptions. That she passed, not a criminal, for her choices, was a blessing. A small glimmer that something was changing. It's always sad to see an old friend go. And as I said, despite the fact that no matter how many times that you work in these areas, no matter what the understanding, it still clearly affects us as a human, all of us. The fact that her funeral was so beautifully done, with relatively small numbers, was probably down to her planning. But, excuse my momentary pause, as she made us do, life continued, and so off we travelled. Now, the year that flowed is pretty much a standard one of jumping in and out of gardens, doing my standard work. There's not a great deal to report. As we sort of unlocked into something while we've worked through all our stuff, I've been doing the same as the rest of you. Trying to work out what on earth it was all about. Coming up with a few ideas. Best I could come up with was it was a big event that brought up a whole lot of stuff for everybody to look at. Fears, loves, where are we, what are we doing? That always happens at the start of a decade. That one was that intense. It's probably a lesson to us all. Now, thank you for listening to an incredibly long, wittery, full moon and twittery, wizardly wandering through lockdown and how it affected me and affected all of us to a degree. It certainly brought up a lot for me. I was aware of all that it had brought up, and it brought up so much for so many to be dealing with. I pretty much thought by December 2021 that I had it all sorted. Just goes to show, just when we think the game's over, the universe can deliver quite an interesting experience as I reflect on it. On for the next episode. Take care, go well, and blessed be.